begin with just standing, and I'm going to come a bit closer so you can see perhaps a bit more detail. Feet parallel, toes pointing forwards. It's fine if your feet are slightly turned out. Sometimes that's more comfortable. You don't want to put a strain on your knees or your hips. It's worth working on this, but it's this exact parallel stance, but it takes a little while. And exaggerating a bit, weight going forward so you can feel the pressure in the balls of your feet, and just bringing yourself back to the upright position by allowing your hips to drop. And then just feeling the support from the ground through your legs, through your skeleton, and support for the upper part of your body from your back. So front of your body, hanging isn't quite the right word. It suggests that nothing's happening there. There is a muscle tone there, but it's not. You want to get away from this idea of having to hold yourself upright. Feel as though you're being held. Just place your hands here, so just slightly below your navel. Imagine there's a little ball there, and press in very gently. It doesn't matter which way you're going to go. Just rotate the ball a little bit in one direction, and just notice the sensations there as the muscles start to move, and obviously it will activate the nervous system in that area. Nice and gently. Change direction. Back, otherwise I'm going to end up going off frame. And then just turning a little bit from side to side in that same area, so hips to waist. You let your hands drop down, they'll move with you, of course, and you just pick the pace up, trying not to twist your knees. The arms feeling quite heavy, but again, not as a kind of drag, just as something that you want to try and work with. And my first teacher, Bronwyn, used to say, imagine you've got heavy shopping bags in your hand. So a sense of pulling your arms around. The other way of doing this is to imagine that you're moving in water, or as though the air around you were a little thicker than normal. That's also a way of encouraging this feeling of connection in the body. This is a common experience. If you go to open a door, and you've been opening the door maybe for some time, and it's a little bit stuck, you'll have programmed yourself to move in a particular way. It's quite natural for our bodies to move differently when there's resistance to when there is no resistance, or no apparent resistance. The air around us will resist the movement, but we're so used to that it doesn't really count. And so you go to open the door and expect it to stick, unknown to you, so someone's fixed it. So you give it, oh, it opens really easily, and it's quite a surprise. Or the other way around, there's a bag on the floor, and you're expecting just to be able to pick up the bag and go to the shops, and then not realizing that somebody's already done the shopping and the bag's quite heavy, and you go, oh, like that, and then you do it again and you lift it differently. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to get that greater sense of connection and a stronger movement, more fluid movement coming out of that connection just all the time. So this engages more of our body, not just more muscles, but the whole body, tendons and ligaments, certainly, the skeletal muscles, the fascia, the skeleton, all working together. What we don't want to do is to try and make that happen. I don't want to sort of move and think, well, I've got to move here, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Just have the idea that you're moving through water, or that there's some kind of resistance. And effectively, you're programming your body So using some kind of image, some kind of idea to begin to subtly change the way that we're moving. And that connection becomes not just the physical connections of bone to bone or something like that, but also the sense of the movement. It's as though your whole body is full of water. And if you've got say a bowl full of water or a bottle full of water, and you tilt it one way, it will go over there. Tilt it the other way, it will come back. So there's this sort of slightly fluid quality that begins to build up. So the imagery that we use to evoke this kind of movement gradually leads us into a sense of what we might call energy, or flow, momentum, connection, so that all aspects of yourself begin to integrate to the movement. Different parts of the body, our awareness, our minds, and the movement itself. And the collective sort of like title, if you like, for those three elements of body, mind, and energy is that they're sometimes referred to as the three jewels, the three treasures. And it's sometimes said, and it's not a bad way to start, actually, that you know the intent is there, and the intent leads the movement, and through the movement, the body itself starts to move. And that can be quite a useful sort of chain of events to focus on. But we can go a little bit beyond that again and find ourselves thinking of these three elements as like the three legs of a tripod, or you get three sticks and you lean them against each other, and they all support each other, and they're all supported by each other. So the relationship is again a fluid one. You might notice, oh, you know, kind of the movement isn't happening, and that might lead you to an understanding of posture. You might have the intent, but the movement isn't responding, or maybe the movement's doing something and it doesn't quite match your intent, and so on and so forth. A lot of Tai Chi practice involves breaking down movements and postures and looking at individual aspects of it. But that shouldn't be seen as the end of the process, because it's essentially that's a bit like if you've got a bike or a car or some kind of machine. Sometimes you take it all apart to service it, to clean it up and to get it to work better. But it's not going to work better until you put it all back together again. So we may be you might want to concentrate on quieting your attention so that your intention is better focused. You might want to think about adjusting your posture, and that will have an effect on your awareness and again on your intention. You might think of the flow of the movement and look to see how you can improve that by tweaking posture and intention. As you get used to these movements, all of these things are out there, and it'll become apparent which is the appropriate one to work on at any one time. So some days I'm practicing and I can't quite get my root down and my legs are out of line, so I'm thinking about the posture. Other times I'm focusing on the flow, and so on and so forth. So all of these things can be considered as we begin the practice session, as we begin the class, so that they start to be at the surface of our awareness as we work with them. What we don't want to do is say, find ourselves doing particular exercises and having to all the time go back and, oh, what was it? Was it, was it where the knees supposed to be or something like that? It's not that we do the exercises perfectly. It's just that, that we've got certain things in place. And then raising your arms. I sometimes use the image of cooking to describe this process where the ingredients are prepared and they're ready to go in the pan, and then eventually they get in the pan and the pan goes in the oven or in the stove or whatever. And then there's the cooking process. You just leave it there and gradually the flavors blend and textures blend and so on and so forth, and you end up with the final dish. So once we've got the ingredients, we don't try to bring them together. We just make sure that we maintain the appropriate sort of functions, the appropriate environment for them to actually blend over a period of time. And then just let your hands drop. So starting with a very simple exercise that can help us to sort of peruse all of those things, but without the complication of an intricacy with the hands or anything. Just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. So the first thing you'll notice is when you go too far, you have to take a step or you tense up. So that gives us an idea of the range of movement where our weight goes forwards roughly to the balls of the feet and back to the front part of the heel. And two aspects to this that are complementary, both of which involve an awareness of what I think of as the center line of the body, which this pole will represent. It's slightly out of place because it should be going down through the middle, but you can see it goes from the border of the foot to the crown of my head. Hopefully, yeah, that would do. So one aspect of this exercise is this. You can see my whole body is moving. The pivot point is in my ankles. So what I don't want to do is this or this or this or this, and sort of like lose that line in the body. Another way of using this idea of the center line, I'll just change my grip, is that it stays there, and as I go forwards and backwards, if I get too far from that center line, I again have to take a step. So again, we get a sense both of the range of movement when I do this, but also of the significance of, in your mind, in your awareness, having that idea of the posture and not going so far that that quality is lost. So really quite a small movement. And you imagine doing this in water. So there's a certain amount of distance. Imagine if you're going forwards or some kind of distance, that there'd be this pressure against the front of your body, upper body, front of your legs, and then as you go back, it changes. And this too, we could think of as a fluidity, like water flowing forwards and backwards. So again, taken us to a very subtle aspect of the movement, where it goes a little bit beyond the pure mechanics of it. Now, hold your hands out to your sides, and again, the pressure of the water would hold your hands back for a moment, and then they'll flow through, and you go back, and again, the pressure of the water holds your arms back. Soften your hips still. And it's not a big movement. Don't start pushing the arms too far out. Soften your elbows and fingers. And so, if I exaggerate, I'm going to come forwards again. So if I exaggerate as I go forwards, my hand is left behind, and there's a kind of opening here. I can feel the muscles extending outwards, and then the muscles will contract quite naturally, and that helps to bring the hands through. When I go back, I get the same feeling, more subtle in my upper back. That's just one example. There's many little patterns of movements that, again, it isn't about right or wrong. I'm not saying this is how it should be moving, because it can vary. but rather using this exercise to train ourselves to recognize those movements. So we become very sensitive to subtle changes within the body. And we begin to realize that we can affect those changes through the use of our attention, through the use of our intention, imagery, or it could be a memory of how this exercise has been felt before, it could be an idea, lots of things. It could be what we observe at the time. But one way or another, our minds are engaged with the movements. So the three treasures are very much a feature here. And those small movements mount up into big movements. So as you get used to the choreography of the exercises, you'll hopefully increasingly have this sense of, how can I put it, the sense of connection of those three treasures, how they interact with each other. And through that, gradually build up the bigger movement. So for instance, I'm not suggesting that you do this, but if, for instance, I got to here and I wanted my hands to go a little bit further, I could just lift my hands up, but that then just engages the shoulders. Or I could use some kind of intent to sort of increase that feeling of expansion and contraction in the body, and let that move my arms for me. This is an ongoing process, I think, in these arts. You could almost argue this is what we practice for. So we're going to move from this exercise to the exercise rooting down that most of you would have seen. And you know, the movement stops just behind the balls of the feet where we're slightly angled. What we've been doing so far is pivoting from the ankles, but I'm going to show you with the pole, so you've got an idea of what, and I'm going to exaggerate this, so I might fall over, you never know. Hold the pole here. So this is what I've been doing, here to here. What happens next is I come forwards to here, and it's now the hips that bring me back. Oops, sorry. The pole was leaning over there. There. So I go to there. I go to there. My head has moved away from the center line. Hips dropping back should bring my head back to that center line. So we're going to do that in a moment. And then as the hips drop back, you bring your hands around, cradling the ball, let your hips drop down a little bit more, and we go into the exercise routine down. So do a couple more of these. And go back in towards your heels and forward. Stop at that point just behind the ball of the foot. Let your hips drop down and change the movement to a vertical. Expanding and so by applying our attention to these smaller movements as we become familiar with the exercises, we're able with a very different type of effort to influence the movement. Rather than thinking about, I'm going to do this and bend the knees or whatever, it's much more subtle, much gentler, but paradoxically much stronger because you're maintaining the connections of the body. So the flow, the energy of the movement gradually builds through this interaction of the three jewels. We're told that when one part of our body is in motion, our whole body is in motion. Our whole body is engaged in one way or another through these connections and small movements. And the overall feeling with that is generally a very pleasant one. And we shouldn't underestimate the significance of that. If you've had a busy morning and you've been kind of like all over the place and your mind's a bit scattered and so on and so forth, this very smooth quality of movement will help you to just to sort of recenter and quieten down, calm down, and perhaps a little bit more clear and at home in your body. Change into the exercise, the wild goose, doing the expansion, pattern of expansion, contraction, changing. Doing it change from between each stage of the movement. Here's the expansion, so what's happening on the sides and the solar plexus compared to the contraction. Another outcome from this, I think, and again, you know, especially if you've had that busy morning, and it might be quite tricky because there'll be part of your mind that's thinking, I've got to do this, I still haven't done that, this didn't go well, or this went right, or whatever. But is this gradual settling of your body, your roots sinking down, tightness and stiffness beginning to release, and a greater and greater sense of your attention, your thoughts, settling in to your body. And both give us this awareness of a certain amount of space in our body and mind. And once again, that space helps enhance the flow of the energy. And then changing as you get more familiar with the exercises and with this process of the interaction of body, mind, and energy, body, mind, and movement. Between them, we can begin to identify movements, patterns, images that actually help us to, in a sense, target or focus on particular parts of the body. So if that busy morning has left you with a sort of tight feeling across your shoulders, or maybe a sort of dull feeling in your thoughts, your head, then we can begin to influence that very gently. One more time. And then change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky, pushing up on one side. And now we've got the opportunity to sort of, in a sense, compare the change from one side of the body to another. It's often the case that we favor one side for all sorts of reasons. That might be a long-term thing. Or it might just be because, you know, maybe we slept on one side and our shoulder's a bit stiff or whatever. I wouldn't like to suggest that all problems can be dissolved away through this process. Sometimes we need to be a bit more assertive, and we might even need, you know, that help from outside. If that stiffness in your neck or that dullness in your head doesn't go away and leads to a headache, yeah, sometimes it's just a good idea to rest. If it's a regular thing, every day you feel that, then probably time to go and talk to your doctor about why you keep getting these sort of headaches and so on and so forth. So this isn't some kind of panacea, but we can still achieve a great deal in our own right, I think. One more of these. This time. Just the first and the last part of the next set for those of you who know it. Hands to your sides and around in front. Hands coming up just a little bit above your head, maybe lower if that's not comfortable, and slightly forward. And you want to feel that somehow the weight of your arms is going down through your shoulders, through your sides, and down in to the ground, rather than straining in your shoulders to hold the arms up. And then coming back down. And here you can feel the weight of your arms hanging. And the last movement of the set, we'll fill in the gaps in a moment, is pushing out to the side. And again, see how my hands are slightly in front, not a long way in front, but slightly in front. And my elbows hanging down. And once again, feeling the weight of my elbows, pulling my shoulders down. Try not to do this. Feel the weight and let the weight go down. So this is a comfortable position. We have the potential for a comfortable position here. And so when we can start to work with those two positions properly, then the movement in between inevitably is going to be more flowing. This time add in the two middle sections, and we don't want to lose that quality. And what we're going to do is turn in hips and waist, push your arms out, turn, and again, just rest there for a moment. Can you still feel that sense of dropping through your elbows? Turn back, bring your hands to your sides, turn the other way. And back, and then push out to the sides. And then just let that begin to flow a little bit more. And that's perhaps a good example of how we might break a movement down. I talked about, working with the individual parts of a movement or the whole art, making sure that the individual parts are as correct as they can be. And then again, this cooking, blending process just beginning to work for us. As you get more experienced in this, knowing how it can feel, even if it doesn't feel like that, is also something that helps us to arrive there, because we feed that memory through our intent into our body, much the same way as if somebody sort of like showed you a photograph from a few years ago and you looked at it and it was you and them doing something maybe a bit funny or very pleasant, and you might just, the memory helps you to relive the experience. Maybe it was maybe you're having a laugh and you smile because that's a very normal response. So once we have a sense of this is how it can feel, then that too can be fed into our body to produce that quality. One more round. So when we get to some of the stronger exercises, and there's one or two coming up, a little bit trickier, try and remember all of these things and combining the three treasures rather than thinking that you got to strain for the movement. Just changing to circling palms. And in this sense, I think we we would do well to consider Tai Chi more as a moving meditation than as a form of exercise. The movement part is obvious, and it clearly is exercise, don't get me wrong, but we tend to have a very set view of what exercise means. And then add in the turn. And then changing sides. Excuse me. Add the turn. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, sink down, push up, let your hands come out, and as you sink down again, it's time to push your hips back. So you tilt forwards, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. And the tilt, I talked earlier about the line from the foot to the crown of your head. Obviously, you're losing that line down to the foot, but you still want to feel it through your upper body. So from shoulders to hips, shall we say. Don't overextend. Let your hands be guided by your hips moving back. If you do that, then you shouldn't feel any sense of being pulled forwards. And then add in a horizontal turn in as well, hands in front of your hips, then your hips go back, you turn again, pushing the table. One more in each direction. And then just come back to this original stance, the Wu Chi stance, and just note how it feels again. And shake out. There's various ways that we can label the feeling, and it's helpful to have that because we name something and it helps us with the recall of it. We could think of rooting down, of centering. They're all aspects of it. The term that I like is central equilibrium. The Chinese term is Zhongding, and this, for me, encapsulates these three treasures of body, mind, and energy, rather than being a purely physical thing or purely mental thing or purely energetic. And so, arguably, while we're doing all these different movements, what we're trying to do is to maintain that quality of central equilibrium, that spaciousness, or however you think about it, in the body. Which, you know, those last couple of exercises we did, it's quite tricky to do that, because you know you're going offline and so on and so forth. So some of them are quite challenging to do that. The next exercise is also, I think, quite challenging, although very simple. You take a step forwards, turn one foot out, step forwards with the opposite foot. So keep the width of your step. If it's too narrow, then you'll end up feeling that you're on a tightrope. And about the same as the width in length. Don't have it too short. This doesn't give me much room for movement, so I need space between my rear toes and my front heel. And you will gradually learn to check these, and you'll begin to know when it's not right. And then just transferring your weight forwards and backwards. Our normal way of moving forwards or backwards will be to initiate, or at least to use very quickly the shoulders, to sort of lean, you get a sense of momentum and so on and so forth. But what we're trying to do is to maintain that line in the body. Once again, I'll show you with the pole. It's not going to go all the way to the foot, so don't think that. It's just it's that. I don't want to do this. If I was going for speed or momentum, if I was, I don't know, running along or something like that, or wanted to swing along for a long period of time to make it easier for myself, angling slightly is not a bad thing, but it's not what we're doing here. We're trying to find out what it takes to move our body, and it's quite a significant movement because the weight transfer is very important for our general mobility. How to let that happen without losing central equilibrium, to maintain the posture that allows for the space and the movement within the body, and also to find reference points for our attention. It's very, very hard to maintain attention consistently, possibly impossible. I don't know. I know I can't do it. But what we can do is to begin to recognize certain key points, like going on a journey and you don't remember every point about the journey, but you do remember the significant landmarks. And the landmarks here are when the weight is settling in each foot. And there's this time of just settling down, of punctuation. It doesn't really interrupt the flow, but it's like having a difference between a long string of words and that long string of words, perhaps with a comma in it, gives it a little bit more accessibility. So at the moment, you'll get about 60% of your weight into the front leg. When you go back a little bit more, 70% is the usual thing. So 60-40, and then going back 70-30. But what we want to do now, again, without losing that upright stance, you go into your back foot, you let the front hip drop, and that helps our toes to come up. I always turn the foot out slightly here to give a bit more space in my hip. You go forwards, you push your back knee forwards, back hip drops, and your heel comes up. And when that happens, both the toes and heel, a little bit more of your weight will shift. So again, this isn't very precise really, but you know, if I'm doing this exercise without the raise of toes and heel, you can see how far, you see where that center line gets to. Again, it should be in the middle of my body, but I can't figure out a way of doing that. When I go back and I sink down, I drop the front hip, my front toes come up. See how the pole moves? It's more or less where I want it to be now. I go forward, that will be my stopping point, 60% in the front. The back knee goes in, the heel comes up, and again, you know, this would be here, sort of thing. You can't see it. So gradually, more of your weight settling into the foot until eventually what's left is the weight of the leg itself. And then it's much easier to just contract the leg, and that will bring your foot in. When you push the foot out again, make sure it goes out or forwards or backwards, and then out to the sides to maintain the width of the step. It comes in, goes out, and eventually you can see in the front it circles out. It creates this sort of quarter of a circle, likewise on the way in. So for the time when you're taking that step and planting the foot down, your leg is hanging from your hip, much the same way as your arms hang from your shoulders. When you go back, the ball of the foot goes down first, then the heel. Don't move the weight until the foot is firmly on the ground. When you go forwards, it's your heel, then your toes, and then your weight. So imagine you're walking on thin ice, or it's like if you're in a dark room and you've got to cross the room and you know there's stuff on the floor and you don't want to trip over it. So you're sort of feeling out with your foot, or maybe walking through long grass and you're not sure, is there a hole in the ground or something like that. Good. Shake out. Have your other foot forward. So get your stance correct. So we do what we would refer to as fixed step in Tai Chi. Feet aren't moving, toes not coming up, heels not coming up yet. Don't rush this. Take each stage and investigate each stage. Just as when you're cooking, you might chop the onions and the carrots, and then you get to something else, and you just do it very quickly, or maybe you rush at it and it goes wrong. Be patient going through each individual stage. Each individual stage is important. This is the basic exercise. And then dropping your hips, toes and heel coming up. In the back of your mind, your landmark, if you like, your basic orientation is that feeling of central equilibrium, that alignment, that quality of movement. This is why I like the term central equilibrium rather than just routine or alignment or something like that, because it invokes all of these aspects, all of the three treasures, which, as I've said, it might be that, well, I haven't got the flow of the movement. Well, maybe your stance is wrong. Maybe you're not dropping your hip, or those kind of things. And then bringing the foot in. We plant the foot, and if you can, just a little bit of pressure forwards and downwards, or backwards and downwards, as though you're just pushing the foot into the ground, like walking on soft sand or in the sea. And then take a few steps through, forwards or backwards, depending on where you have the space. The useful thing here, I find, is to think about that feeling of your hips dropping down. If you get that, it's a bit wobbly, then actually dropping the hips. It's useful at that point to have one thing to think about. If you think about, oh, hold on, I've got to do this, this, and this, it's too many things. And in the other direction, if you haven't changed already. And so the sort of quickness of our recovery from these little wobbles is very connected with our intention, our awareness. And so it's useful to have a particular part of the body to focus on. And really the hips are very key. If the hips drop, your center of gravity drops. And if your center of gravity drops, you'll be more stable. Okay, so we're going to do fisherman castanet, going into pushing wave going into Wind Blows the Willows. What I want you to do is to try and just be aware of those very subtle changes in the body. So fisherman cast a net, I can feel certain parts of the body expanding and contraction as I go through this, using that trained awareness. Again, when I go into pushing wave, the same kind of thing. And then when I go into Wind Blows the Willows, again, the same kind of thing. And actually, there's a lot of overlap between the three exercises, I think you'll find. Have your right foot forwards. First of all, fisherman cast the net. Almost like that first exercise, swaying in the river, but with the addition of the movement of your weight. Bringing in whatever elements from the class and previous practices that are significant. So this is why I spend so long on basics at the start of the session. It's like they're all laid out in front of you, and we start to bring in whatever's appropriate for us at the time. And then pushing wave. One more time. Go forwards, move a little bit. Here, turn to your left and let that movement draw your left hand back. Bring the hands into position, very similar to the wild goose. Move your weight back, let your hands drop down. Turn towards the front foot. Wind blows the willows. So those are the components, and like that, like in the cooking process, there will be a certain amount of overlap. Think of the overlap of these different elements in this and other exercises as something that happens at the edges of the process. So, the turn is mostly towards the point where you're settling into one leg. That doesn't mean it doesn't turn in the middle a little bit. Transfer of your weight, again, another one of those processes. And so they overlap, but they shouldn't eclipse each other. They shouldn't cover each other up, because then we'll lose one of them. Good. Okay, and shake out. So it's like, you've got your two hands. Maybe you've got the turn in the center, and then you've got the transfer of the weight. And we've worked on both of them. We know what both can do. And what will happen is this. But what we don't want to happen is this. We don't want the turn to be on its own. We want the weight to move, and so on and so forth. So that was your right foot forwards, I think. Left foot forward, same thing, starting with fisherman cast a net. So you're moving through water. One more time, going back, changing to pushing wave. Forwards, settling into the front leg, turning, wind blows the wind. Now, next time you go forwards, settling into the front leg, and as you turn, drop the back hip down again. Raise the heel of your back foot, bring the foot in. Step back, same thing. Now settling in, drop the hip, front hip, step in. And then from here, foot comes in, and either just take the step, or else you can raise the foot a little bit, perhaps, and step. So another direction. This is dragonfly skims the water. It's quite tricky. Think about that feeling of your hips sinking. And then step back. Change direction. You may have been going backwards already. One more time. And bring your feet down. Good. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. Into your back, lower part of your back. Very gently. Around your hips. Your legs. Light on your belly. And the upper part of your chest. Okay. Before we finish, just to say that there won't be a class week after next. So we're here on the 14th, but not on the 21st. And if you're somebody who watches this on YouTube, what I'll do is I'll record the Thursday class before that. So you'll still have a class to follow. So the last exercise is really all about coming back to central equilibrium. Embrace tiger, return to the mountain. I quite like the idea associated with this exercise that the tiger is just our everyday life with all its kind of ups and downs and complexities and so on and so forth. The mountain is this lovely image for me of central equilibrium. Still, calm, strong, rooted, spacious, so on and so forth. So it's worth observing what it is for you that brings you back to the mountain, brings you back to central equilibrium. So let your hips drop down. 4 stages, push up, let your arms come out. Then bring your hands around as though they're holding the ball against your chest. Elbows drop, bringing your hands in, and then like the rooting down exercise, pressing down. There's a double breath cycle here. This would be an in breath and an out breath. But key to this, if you want to use the breath, in breath and then an out breath. So the out breath might be, or the in breath might be something that you choose to sort of focus on to bring you back to the mountain. That's another aspect of it. Remember that not everybody's comfortable with the breathing. It's not a failure. If that happens, one more time. And let your hands come down to this area again. Once again, imagine the ball and just make maybe 4 or 5 rotations in one direction. And then change direction. Don't get too concerned about getting the count accurate. And then just let your hands drop down. Take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. And shake out. Lovely. Good. Thank you very much, everybody. So, as I say, we'll be here definitely next week, but not the week after.